I found a dying Doberman puppy in the snow, but what happened next changed everything. The snow fell so thick I could no longer see the road, drifting in a white hush that smothered sound and swallowed the world. And beneath the bench on Pine Ridge Trail, a soggy cardboard box lay, its torn edge flapping in the wind, while a weak, thread-like moan seeped out of it like a needle tapping against ice. I dropped to my knees, wind lashing my face until the cold felt like pain under the skin. I opened it. Inside was a Doberman pup, not even 2 weeks old, curled into a filthy scrap of cloth, its body convulsing with tiny shudders, ribs, flattened fur matted into hard clumps by snow, every breath so faint it might have been a rumor. My fingertip met fur that was as cold and hard as stone, and for a second my chest shut like a door. It lifted a tiny trembling paw and laid it on my hand. In that instant, the hospital memory came roaring back, Margaret's dry, thin fingers gripping mine once, then letting go forever. And the old, hollow ache opened up sharp and bright in my skull. I bit down on my jaw until the pain seared through me. No, not again. I unwound my scarf and wrapped it tight around that small body, pressing it in against my chest, so its breath could find skin and something warm to cling to, feeling that fragile heat against me, like proof that it was still here. I rose, snow stinging my face, wind howling in my ears as I tucked it deeper and started back along the white road, each step dragging like I was hauling a life behind me. We were going home. Every step felt heavy, as if I were carrying more than a pup. If I had walked away, then I would not have just lost a dog. I would have lost the last part of myself. The cabin door slammed open, the wind shoving in behind me. The fireplace had been cold for months, the air thick with the smell of old ash and damp wood. I didn't take off my boots or coat. I just knelt, laid the soaked scarf and the small trembling life on a wool blanket before the hearth. There was no fire yet, only the breath of cold. I reached for the light switch. A weak yellow glow spread over the pup's face. It didn't move. Its chest rose so faintly I had to lean close to be sure it was still breathing. The skin had gone bluish, mud clung to its belly, and a metallic chill came from its wet fur. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, heavy and raw. Don't leave me, little one. Just a bit longer. I lurched toward the kitchen, the old cupboard groaning as I tore through it, salt coffee grounds, broken cups, until I found it the worn plastic syringe Margaret once used to feed milk to a stray kitten. When I picked it up, my hand shook so hard the plastic squeaked. Memory poured in like floodwater. I saw her here stirring a pot of warm milk, her silver hair glowing under the kitchen light. Her voice was soft as a sigh, Walter. If you can save a life, never turn away. I took a breath, forcing my hands to steady. The burner flared. Blue fire hissed alive, thawing something deep inside me. I poured milk into the pot. Steam rising, fogging the window glass until the kitchen felt alive again, with warmth, with sound, with purpose. The air smelled like memory. I filled the little cup, dipped the syringe, and turned back. The pup still lay there, faint tremors running through its legs, eyes half-lidded. I knelt beside it, brought the syringe to its mouth. Come on, Shadow. I didn't know why that name came to me, but when I spoke it, I understood it was perfect. Small as a shadow, fragile as one, and I feared that if I moved too slowly it would vanish. The first drop touched its dry lips. No reaction. The second, then I heard it, a faint swallow. Another and another. I broke down, silent and shaking, tears falling onto my head, mixing with the milk. That's it. Drink, little one. Drink. Don't give up. Drop by drop I fed it life, and with every swallow, I felt time come back to me like I was reclaiming one lost year after another. When its belly lifted just slightly, I stopped, wiped the corner of its mouth, wrapped it again in the scarf, and pressed it to my chest. There was warmth now, weak but real. It had been so long since this house had felt alive. I sank into the old chair, shadow on my chest. Outside, the storm still screamed the snow, hammering the windows like 1,000 claws, but in here the fire crackled to life. The smell of milk blended with wood smoke, forming something achingly familiar like the past returning in gentle breaths. I didn't sleep. I just watched. Each time its breathing faltered, I leaned close, ready to do anything to keep it here. I kept my palm on its chest, feeling the fragile rhythm, whispering, "From now on, you'll never lie in a cold box again. I promise." The fire grew steady, its light dancing over the wooden walls, flickering across Margaret's photo. I looked at her smile, the one I'd never forgotten, and nodded softly as if speaking to the ghost of her warmth. I did it, love. I didn't walk away. Midnight struck. I was still there, holding Shadow, his breathing steady now. A tremor passed through me, not from cold, but from the realization that the house had just heard its first living sound after 5 silent years. Outside, the wind still howled, and the roof shuddered under the snow. But I no longer heard loneliness, only a small, steady breath woven with the beat of my heart. That night, I understood some lives don't come to be saved. They come to remind us that we still can love, still can guard a heartbeat that isn't our own. I tightened the scarf, pressed him closer, and whispered into the quiet, "Sleep now, Shadow." We made it through the first night. The first morning in Eagle Creek was so quiet it felt haunted. Outside, the snow still fell soft and endless, but inside the cabin the fire hadn't gone out. I slumped in the chair, the damp scarf still wrapped around the tiny body, pressed against my chest. I had stayed awake the whole night, guarding every breath. When the first light slipped through the window, I heard it, a faint sigh, delicate as a breeze brushing glass. I opened my eyes. Shadow moved. One small paw curled, trembled, then relaxed again. I barely dared to breathe. I leaned down and placed my hand on his chest. One beat, then another, uneven but alive. "You're still here," I whispered, my voice hoarse, almost speaking to myself. Outside, the pale light filtered through the curtains, falling across his tiny face. His eyelids fluttered open, still cloudy, unfocused, but a faint reflection stirred within them. Those eyes searched the space before stopping where I sat. I held my breath. For that brief moment, I could swear he was looking for me, and when he stopped, I knew he'd found me. All that morning, I didn't move from my spot. Every 2 hours, I warmed the milk, filled the syringe, and knelt on the floor. Each drop that touched his mouth, I counted. Each swallow, I braced myself, terrified it might be the last. 3 days passed like that. Shadow was still alive, though frail. The tremors had eased, but his breathing remained heavy. Whenever he lay too still, panic seized me. I'd place a hand on his belly, waiting for a rise. Some seconds stretched into eternity, and when his chest finally lifted, I laughed through my tears. I realized something strange. 5 years had gone by without a single tear. I thought my grief had buried that part of me alongside Margaret. But that night, when Shadow turned his tiny head, I wept like a child. Thank you for still breathing. The cabin seemed to open with me. Firelight reached the ceiling, flickering across Margaret's framed smile. Outside, the snow slowed. The wind fell silent, leaving only the sounds of life crackling. Wood steady, breathing the faint hum of warmth returning. I began talking to him. Not loud, not clear, just enough for 2 living souls to hear. I told him about Margaret, about the years I spent building tables, about how she used to laugh while cooking. Shadow didn't understand, but each time I spoke he stirred, curling his paws as if to answer, as if he was listening. On the 5th day, something small happened. While I was warming the milk, I turned and saw him trying to lift his head. Slow, trembling, but trying. I set the cup down, knelt, and held my breath. "That's it, Shadow. A little more." He raised his head for 1 full second. Then it dropped again. But I didn't feel defeated. I smiled, because I'd just witnessed the rarest thing, a choice to live. That night, I placed him in a wicker basket beside my bed. I didn't sleep on the couch anymore. I made the bedspread an extra blanket and set the basket close enough to hear his breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of waking up to silence. Before turning off the lamp, I looked over and saw his chest rising evenly. The fire's glow flickered across those cloudy eyes, dim but shining. I whispered, "Sleep, Shadow. Tomorrow, we'll try again." Outside, the snow still fell, but I heard something else, the sound of the house breathing again. The wind across the eaves felt like human breath, the creak of wood like a heartbeat. And in the center of it all, the warmth of that fragile life melted into mine, making everything around me feel alive once more. I laid my hand over the basket, feeling each tiny breath. I was no longer an old man waiting to die in the snow. I was someone guarding a miracle. The 10th morning in Eagle Creek burst with light. I woke to a faint scratching sound, soft, persistent. When I looked down beside the bed, Shadow was struggling to stand in the wicker basket. His tiny legs trembled, his head wobbled, his whole body swayed, but he stood. I jumped up, my heart pounding like I'd just heard music for the first time in years. "Good job, Shadow. Just a little at a time." He fell right after that, but it didn't matter. I laughed. I hadn't laughed in so long. Morning sunlight spilled over the cabin's wooden walls, glinting off Margaret's photo frame, making her smile seem alive again. That day, I began to clean the house. I swept the dust from the hearth, washed the porcelain bowl she once loved, and folded the blankets neatly. I didn't know why, but I couldn't bear the mess anymore. Maybe, when life returns, it demands space to breathe. The cabin that had been silent for 5 long years now echoed with small sounds, footsteps, crackling fire, my murmurs while feeding milk, and the soft, rhythmic breathing beside me, the heartbeat of the house. That afternoon, I opened the window for the first time in many winters. The wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Shadow lay in his basket, ears twitching as if hearing the world for the very first time. I sat beside him, resting my palm on his small head, his fur smooth and warm. "This is your home now, little one. A real home." That night, I read from an old book by the fire. He curled on my lap, chest rising and falling gently. I didn't read for meaning, just to fill the air with sound. Words blended with the wind outside, weaving a rhythm of life between us. 3 days later, he began walking across the floor. Each time he fell, he'd lift his head, his clouded eyes turning toward me. Each time I'd whisper, "That's it, Shadow." No one gets it right the first time. And I suddenly remembered Margaret saying the same thing when she taught our first daughter to walk. The memory burned behind my eyes, and I had to look away. On the 4th day, as I was bringing in firewood, I heard a voice calling from the fence. Mrs. Langley, my neighbor across the ridge, stood at the gate with a basket of bread. "Walter, I heard you've got yourself a puppy." I smiled and nodded. "Not exactly. It's more like we're saving each other." She peered past me and saw Shadow wobbling near the door, ears drooping, legs still unsteady. "Oh, heavens, he's so small." But with a heart bigger than mine, I said. She chuckled, setting the basket on the fence. "You look different, Walter. And so does this place. Feels like something's alive again." I didn't answer. I just looked down at my hands, the hands of a man who thought he had nothing left to hold, now trembling because they were holding life again. That evening, sunlight slanted through the window, pooling across the floor like a golden rug. Shadow lay in it, breathing softly, his belly round and full. I set my book aside and sat still. For the first time in years, I felt the house breathing with me. The wood creaked gently, the wind whispered through the eaves, and the fire in the hearth no longer died too soon. Later, I brewed coffee, 2 cups like before. One for me, one beside Margaret's photo. Shadow looked up, then at the cup. I smiled and said, half joking, half true, "She's probably laughing somewhere, seeing the two fools who traded whiskey for warm milk." Shadow barked softly, raspy and weak, but it made me laugh out loud. For the first time, laughter echoed inside this house. That night I sat in the wooden chair, Shadow curled on my lap, my hand stroking his back. I realized then the past years I hadn't been living. I'd been waiting to be buried, and tonight, feeling that tiny warmth against me, I knew I was finally alive again. "I didn't save you, Shadow," I whispered. "You saved me. And this house, too." I turned off the lamp, leaving only the fire's glow. Outside, snow still fell, but the flames reflected on Margaret's frame, and for a moment I felt her presence right here with me and Shadow in a cabin that had finally learned how to breathe again. Spring came late to Eagle Creek. The last patches of snow melted along the ridge, revealing young green grass and the scent of wet earth rising from the stream bed. Every morning when I opened the cabin door, Shadow was already waiting on the porch tail, wagging gently, eyes bright as if asking, "Walk today, Walter?" I laughed, really laughed, the kind that shakes something loose inside you. We followed the narrow path along the pines, the air still carrying a chill, but the sunlight already turning gold and soft. Each of Shadow's paw prints marked the damp earth, small yet certain, while beside them my heavier steps fell slower and deeper, 2 lines side by side leading all the way toward town. The people of Eagle Creek had grown used to seeing us. Mrs. Langley would call out from her yard, "Walter, that dog of yours looks like a little soldier now," and I'd grin back. "He guards my sleep as if it were treasure." And he did. Shadow grew fast, sleek, black coat, broad chest, amber eyes that caught the light. But no matter how strong he became, something in his gaze remained old, like the echo of a wound. At sudden noises, he'd whip around, muscles tensed, ears high. I realized the scars he carried weren't on his skin. They were stitched into memory. In the afternoons, I'd rid by the window while he lay still, his head resting on my leg. I read aloud, not because he understood, but because it made the house sound alive. When the wind drifted through the open frame, our shadows stretched across the wooden floor, one tall, one small, melding into one shape. "You're my shadow, aren't you?" I murmured. "But maybe. Sometimes the shadow is the light." He lifted his head and touched his nose to my hand, answering without words. And I realized I was no longer talking to an animal. I was talking to the last friend I'd ever have. Sometimes I caught him staring out the window toward Pine Ridge Trail, the place where I'd found him buried under snow. Each time the wind moved through the trees, his ears flicked, his gaze wandered far. That look broke something in me. "No, Shadow," I whispered. "There's nothing out there for you. Home is here." He turned to me, then, eyes clear as glass, pressing his head into my palm. I believed he understood. But at night, when the fire burned low, I'd still see his silhouette by the door, staring into the dark, and a quiet fear crept in, soft as falling snow, but heavier each day he might leave me. Some nights I'd wake in panic, searching the room until I heard the steady rhythm of his breath near the floor. Only then could I rest again. It's strange, once I feared losing Margaret. Now I feared losing a dog. But maybe love doesn't ask what kind it is. When it's real, it trembles the same way in every heart. One morning, I brewed coffee as usual. Shadow lay on the porch, chin resting on the step, eyes half closed in sunlight. I watched him and felt something unnamed rising in me, peace mixed with ache. "I know, Margaret," I said quietly. "You sent him, didn't you?" That afternoon, we walked to the creek behind the house. The thawed water rushed and laughed like children. Shadow darted about, splashing ears up his paws, scattering droplets that caught the sun like glass. He barked once, then charged into the shallow stream, turning the whole surface into light. I clapped and laughed. For a moment, the world held only us, an old man and a soul reborn from the dark. As the sun dipped, I sat on a stone shadow, leaning against my leg, both of us watching the sunset fade over the snowy ridge. The sky shifted from gold to violet, mirrored in the sheen of his black coat. I laid a hand on his head and whispered, "If there's another life after this one, I want to find you again. Maybe not as a dog, just as wind or as a shadow, but find me." He didn't answer, only pressed his head harder against my knee, breathing warm and calm. And in that quiet I understood sometimes salvation isn't a miracle. It's just a pair of eyes willing to listen. That night, back in the cabin, the firelight flickered across the wall, merging our shadows, one tall one, low into a single form. I realized then we were no longer two separate lives. From two souls abandoned to winter, we had become halves of the same breath. Evening settled over Eagle Creek. The last light of day slid through the pines, spilling gold and red across the road that led to the general store. I carried a small basket, just milk, a bit of bread, and a pack of candles for Margaret's altar. Beside me, Shadow walked close, silent but alert as always. The town was quiet. Only the wind, my footsteps, and the soft rhythm of his claws striking the damp road. When we reached the parking lot behind the store, I bent to tie my shoelace. When I looked up, someone was standing there. A young man, face roughened by drink, eyes red and wild. "Spare some change, old man." I shook my head. "I don't have any son." A coarse laugh, then a shove hard enough to knock me down. The basket hit the ground, the bottle of milk shattered white, spreading over black pavement. Pain shot through my shoulder before I could move, and then his hand grabbed at my coat pocket. And then the growl came, low, deep, rolling like thunder over the hills. Shadow burst from the side, a streak of black lightning. His hackles rose chest-wide, teeth bared. He planted himself between me and the man body, taut as a drawn bow. The sound coming from his chest froze the air itself. The man stumbled back. Shadow's amber eyes locked on him, burning with the reflection of the sunset. "Get back, mutt," the man muttered, voice shaking. Shadow stepped forward once, not attacking, not barking, just standing there between me and the darkness. His paws dug into the ground, shoulders low, ready to die if I so much as bled. I heard my heartbeat hammering heavy, raw, echoing in my ears. "Shadow, easy." I tried, my voice trembling, but he didn't move. His stare never broke. The young man swallowed, then backed away. A second later he turned and ran, footsteps fading down the alley until the wind took them. I collapsed to the ground. My shoulder throbbed, my legs shook. Shadow turned instantly, the growl gone. He pressed his head into my hand, eyes full of worry, his breath hot against my wrist. I cupped his head with both hands, voice breaking. You saved me, Shadow." I held him tight. The smell of sun-scorched fur, spilled milk, and wet asphalt all mixed together. I could feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive, the same heartbeat I once cradled in my hands, now given back to me. An old man was rescued by the very creature he'd once pulled from death in the snow. That reversal split me open, tears burning down my face. I whispered each word, pulled straight from my chest. "It wasn't just me saving you, little one. You dragged me out of a death I never dared to name." The sunset spread over the parking lot, coating us both in gold. The spilled milk shimmered on the asphalt like a veil of mist. A soft wind passed, lifting the wool scarf around my neck, the same one I'd wrapped around him that frozen night long ago. Shadow pressed his head against my chest. I trembled, not from pain, but from the sudden clarity I had saved him from dying, and he had saved me from merely existing. We stayed like that for a long while, sitting in the fading light. A passerby called from across the street. "Walter, you all right?" I nodded, voice rough. "I'm fine. We're fine." On the walk home, the rain began, soft, hesitant drops tapping against the fallen leaves like the heartbeat of memory. Shadow walked beside me, his body brushing my leg, our steps matching. I rested a hand on his head. No words, no thanks, just the quiet truth pulsing between us, the loyalty of a soul that loves with everything it has. Back at the cabin, I sank beside the fireplace. My shoulder ached, but my heart burned warm. Shadow curled up next to me, his head resting on my knee, eyes half closed. I ran my hand down his back and whispered, "You're the wall between me and the dark shadow. From now on, neither of us has to be afraid." Outside, thunder rolled away into the distance, and in the flickering firelight our shadows merged on the cabin wall, one shape, one breath, two souls who had saved each other. Winter returned to Eagle Creek, but this year the snow fell differently. It wasn't cold nor lonely. It drifted softly, gently, like a blessing from the sky. I sat on the cabin porch, the old wooden chair I'd repaired that summer creaking under me. Beside me, Shadow lay stretched out, his head resting on my knee, eyes half closed. The wind swept down from the ridge carrying the scent of pine and the faint chime of the church bell from the valley below. I looked down at him. His black coat gleamed like velvet, now chest broad, body strong, nothing like the trembling scrap of life I'd once found in that snow-covered box. I spoke softly, my voice shaking but calm. "Look, Shadow. The snow's still falling, but this time we're not alone." He lifted his head, amber eyes glinting in the fading light. I placed a hand on his head, feeling warmth move through my skin, sinking all the way to my heart. Each touch brought me back to that stormy night, the night I heard a whimper quieter than the wind, and reminded me that sometimes miracles don't fall from heaven. They live in the hands that refuse to give up. Mrs. Langley passed by the fence calling out, "Walter, you and Shadow sitting there again. Beautiful day, isn't it?" I smiled, raising a hand. "Yes, ma'am. We both love the snow. It reminds us that even winter can begin again." She laughed and walked on. I watched her go, then looked down at Shadow. He lay still, breathing slow and steady. I whispered, barely louder than the breeze, "I used to think my life ended with Caroline. But you proved me wrong. A second chance isn't something heaven grants, it's something we choose to keep when everything else lets go." Shadow opened his eyes and looked at me. In them, I saw a light I'd once known in the woman I loved, serenity, understanding, and forgiveness. I chuckled softly as tears slipped down before I could stop them. "Margaret must be smiling somewhere, huh? You see, love, I still remember how to love, even when I thought I'd forgotten." The cabin was different now. On the table by the window, instead of dust, sat two bowls, one for me, one for him. On the wall hung a new photo from autumn me, on the porch Shadow standing beside both of us facing the pines. Beneath Margaret's picture I'd placed a small wooden plaque engraved with the words, "Love didn't end." It changed shape. By afternoon, the sunset poured gold across the mountainside. Shadow and I walked along the frozen creek. The water had crusted at the edges, but beneath the ice, it still whispered, steady as the heartbeat of the earth. Shadow ran ahead, turning back every few steps as if to make sure I was still following. Each paw print left deep marks in the snow, and watching them filled me with something both sweet and aching, gratefulness, simply for being alive to see it. When the sun dipped behind the trees, I called him back. He came bounding toward me, breath-fogging white in the chill air. I cupped his head to my chest, speaking slowly as if to life itself. "I don't know how many more winters we'll get, Shadow, but if I know one thing, it's this: I'll never let anyone die in silence again. No one will be left in the snow, not while we're still here." He didn't bark, only nestled his head deeper into my coat, and I knew he understood. When night fell, the fire in the cabin glowed bright. On the wall, our shadows merged, one tall, one low, blending into a single form. I sighed, not from sorrow, but peace, because I knew I'd found what most spend their lives searching for the meaning of being loved even at the end. If anyone ever asks me what a miracle is, I'll tell them. About a snowy night, a soaked cardboard box, and a small life that chose to stay. And I'll say, miracles don't come from afar. They begin the moment you stop, bend down, and reach out your hand. Because sometimes we save a fragile life, but it's that life that saves what's still human in us. I closed my eyes, listening to the crackle of fire, the slow, even rhythm of Shadow's breath. A deep, peaceful sleep took me. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the pines in white. But inside that small cabin in Eagle Creek, love remained. When I found Shadow, I thought I was saving him. But years later I realized, maybe he was the one who saved me. From a cold wooden cabin in Eagle Creek, my mornings now begin with the sound of his paws pattering across the porch. Each time the wind passes through the forest, I still see that familiar dark silhouette beside me, steady, quiet, loyal. Shadow isn't just a dog who survived. He's proof that every living soul, no matter how small, no matter how abandoned, deserves love and a chance to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Let someone out there who's losing faith know that sometimes all it takes is a single hand reaching out to change an entire life. No one should die in silence, not while kindness still exists, not while you still have the power to stop, kneel, and say, "I see you. I won't walk away." If you believe that too, leave A or A in the comments. And join us where every story isn't just about rescue, but about the journey of learning to rescue ourselves through love. Because, as Shadow taught me, true love never leaves. It simply chooses to stay.